Hey guys, so today we're going to talk about the Arab-Israeli conflict from 1947 up until the eve of the Suez Crisis of the Six-Day War in 1967. So this is the UN partition plan. At the end of World War II, the UN Special Commission on Palestine recommended that the area known as Palestine be separated into three official states. The yellow here would be the Jewish state, the green would be a Palestinian state, and the reddish region here would be a shared region that would be administered by the UN. Um, excuse me. So here's some of the reactions to the plan. The Jewish population overwhelmingly was positive. They liked this plan. One of the reactions was increased immigration. Some of the Jews were disappointed that they did not get Eretz Israel, which means the entirety of the land of Israel. With regard to the Palestinian population, it was huge amounts of outrage and then also violent attacks. They felt that their land had been taken from them and that they were being forced to give up their land for no really good reason. So there was protests, there was violent attacks, and then the Jewish population also staged counterattacks. And so after the release of the partition plan, there really starts to be this violence and the civil war between the Jewish and the Palestinian populations. And the British really have this hands-off attitude that kind of escalates until May of 1949 when they say, we're out, we're done. And that same day, the Jewish People's Council had met and said that they were going to just take the land they wanted, or the land that they believed to be what was entitled to them, known as Eretz Israel, that they were going to claim all of Palestine. And then the Palestinian armies start laying siege to Jewish towns and cities, and this turns into a war, and even calling it a civil war is kind of interesting because both sides sort of see themselves as defending their rights. The Israelis see themselves defending their right to a homeland which has been promised to them by the British, by the Americans, by the UN, and then in some of their opinions, by God. The Palestinians also see themselves as defending their rights to their homeland and defending against European intervention. And then this eventually turns into a broader war, the Arab-Israeli War, otherwise known as the Israeli War of Independence. And it begins after the British leave the mandate, and the British really just cut and run. They do not get involved in a peaceful transition of power. They just are out. And this war lasts until 49 and results in, so Arab forces from Jordan, or as that was known, Transjordan and Syria, invade and reinforce the Palestinian forces. This war is going to last for almost a full year until March of 1949. So some of the results of the Arab-Israeli War, which is 700,000, I've seen it actually estimated 700,000 to 750,000 Palestinians are forced to leave their homeland, and about 700,000 Jews immigrate to Israel, and about about 1/3 of those incoming immigrants are Jews who've been expelled from neighboring Arab states. So all the Jews that were in Iraq, Syria, Jordan, and Lebanon have been kicked out. And Israel captures about 50 to 60% more land than they were originally entitled to in the original partition plan. All right, so next we're going to take a look at three newsreels from the 1930s and 40s. The first is from the 1930s and describes the British rule over over the mandate. The second one describes displaced persons, meaning particularly Holocaust survivors, in Europe waiting to go to Israel. And the third describes Israel being welcomed into the United Nations. I'd like you to pay attention while looking at these and see whose voice is left out. All right, so they'll have some titles on them going forward.
A guardian of law and order looks out over the old walled city of Jerusalem as once again the irresistible force of Zionism meets the immovable object of Arab nationalism among the blood-stained hills of the Holy Land. Armored cars with reinforced screens patrol the road from Jerusalem to Bethlehem. These pictures from Pathé's own cameraman in the east show the height of the danger in Jerusalem when arson, murder and wanton destruction were making the Holy Land a land of terror. For weeks past, armed bands have been filtering into the city, some secretly through underground passages, others in disguise through the old city gates. By increasingly violent terrorism, they had brought the life of the city almost to a standstill. Then, as more Palestine police arrive, Britain shows that she is master of the situation, cleans up the city, restores order. Once again, the people can walk abroad in safety. In the narrow streets of the Arab city, the bazaars reopen. Peace reigns again. Yet so careful has Britain's army been to avoid unnecessary violence that in 2 days of continuous skirmishing, only 9 people were killed. And once again, Jews can come to the historic Wailing Wall to pray. But behind the outward peace lies still the threat of rebellion and disorder. Britain still stands by.
Hope, faith, and charity march hand in hand with these displaced persons at an UNRWA camp in Upper Austria. Hope that their dreams of someday reaching Palestine may come true. Faith that mankind will solve his problems without recourse to another war, when it was war that tore them loose from their homes and left them dependent upon the charity of men and women across the sea. Their problem is a world's problem. There are 1,500 DPs, displaced persons, in this camp, which is but one of many. Eagerly, they scan their bulletin board for world news. Any letters, any news from Palestine? As they wait and wonder, their children learn the language of people who are helping them. An uncle to us is a godfather to them.
The United Nations General Assembly, which helped to create the State of Israel, now elects her a member nation. Assembly President Abbott announces,
formally declare Israel admitted to membership in the United Nations.
Although Britain abstained from voting, congratulations are showered on Israel's Foreign Minister Moshe Sharett from all the delegates. The young republic, born of war, now joins the Council of Peace. The blue and white Star of David is added to the flags of the 58 other member states. Simultaneously with her admission to UNO, Tel Aviv, capital of Israel, celebrates the first anniversary of the state's independence. Crowds are so big that a giant parade has to be cancelled. In synagogues throughout the land, thousands of worshippers attend Thanksgiving services. The day is declared an official holiday, and in Jerusalem, parades take place as scheduled. The milling throngs keep their good spirits despite the crush. They salute the men and women who helped build a new democratic state.
So, as you saw from those videos, international support for the State of Israel was pretty strong. There was a feeling that the moving of displaced persons from camps in Europe to Israel was the right thing to do. There was a lot of sort of goodwill, international goodwill for the creation of the State of Israel. And so when Israel, after the 48 to 49 war, conquers a great deal more land than they were originally entitled from the original partition plan, there is really a good deal of support for that. And if you look here, it is a pretty sizable amount of land, and if you were able to see a topographical map, you would see that this is also incredibly fertile land that is conquered. So from 49 to 67, the West Bank, which is the area right here, there. The West Bank is controlled by Jordan. It's the West Bank of the Jordan River. The Gaza Strip by Egypt, and the Golan Heights, which are in the north, are controlled by Syria. And there's really continual violence between Israel and the Arab states. And many of the Palestinians who escape to Arab states, and there are sort of this wave of guerrilla insurgents or infiltrators who travel over the border into Israel and commit terroristic violence. And it's approximately 280 Israeli civilians and about 250 Israeli military are killed by these infiltrators, and in retaliation, the Israeli army attacks villages that are believed to be supporting or hiding these insurgents. There's also just attacks that are strategic in value. It's estimated that about 2,500 to 7,000 Arab infiltrators are killed during this time, although it's really unclear if all of them were infiltrators. Some were people who were trying to find work or were just traveling. And there are Palestinian civilians who are killed in Israeli army attacks as well, but there are no hard numbers on those. So, I mean, it's really a state of active or simmering war. There's no lasting peace in this time period. And in the early 60s, an environment of increasing tension. So I'm going to actually play, so in 1956, the president of Egypt, who is named Nasser, he takes control of the Suez Canal, which is an incredibly important canal that connects the Red Sea and the Mediterranean. So it is essential for shipping routes. So even though it is in Egypt and thousands and thousands of Egyptians died while building it, it is controlled by a European corporation. So in 56, the president of Egypt nationalizes the canal, and by nationalizing it, basically says it's ours now, too bad. The leader so Nasser is an Arab nationalist. He's a pan-Arabist. He thinks that all of the Arabs should band together, and he is also pretty closely aligned with the Soviets. He sort of was reaching out to them for help. And so Israel is the first invader of the Sinai Peninsula, which is then, he is followed by the British and the French, who invade as well. And the Americans really don't like this. They don't like that the Europeans, that the British and the French and the Israelis invaded without American approval. They don't like that this might potentially align Egypt closer with the Soviet Union, and they also don't like the optics. They don't like how it looks that European countries are invading and in a way oppressing a sort of emerging third world country. And if you know what's happening so after U.S. influence, French and British withdraw, and Israel and Israel withdraws as well, but there really is residual conflict between Israel and Egypt, and that's going to last and continue until the 1967 war. So I have two newsreel clips from the time period, and we're gonna watch them now.
At the Portsmouth Naval Base, Britain prepares for the worst in the Suez Crisis. Part of her mothball fleet, idle since World War II, is hastily made ready for action. President Nasser continues to defy the Western powers on his seizure of the canal and seeks the support of Russia and the Arab League countries. The aircraft carrier Theseus is the first to leave for the Mediterranean, to be quickly followed by the carriers Bulwark and Ocean. Preparations are also made to ferry 20,000 reservists to the area if necessary. Meanwhile, a French fleet sails from Toulon as diplomats desperately seek a conference that will head off war.
So as I mentioned earlier, it's about we're going to talk now about how essentially the Arab world responds to the state of Israel. So it's approximately 711,000 Palestinians, which is the vast majority of the Palestinian population, become refugees in 48. And then they go to other Arab countries, and some do remain in Israel, or in the land that's controlled by Israel in Gaza or the West Bank, but many do escape to other places. And now the descendants of those refugees are about 5 million people, which is going to become an issue in the future when negotiating a settlement between Israel and Palestine. And the Arab states who accept Palestinian refugees refuse to offer them citizenship, keeping most of them in these sort of horrific conditions of refugee camps. And I'm going to have a picture of that in a moment. But by not giving them citizenship, there is a political benefit, which is that if the Palestinians accepted new citizenship of Syria or Lebanon or Jordan, they would be essentially giving up their right to return to Palestine. And that it's 3 million of those refugees remain in refugee camps in Syria, Lebanon, and Jordan, while 2 million are in refugee camps in Gaza and the West Bank. And those people make up about half of the population of Gaza and the West Bank. So in the 1960s, there is a rise in sort of these political movements that will address the issues facing the Arab world. And the three we're going to talk about right now are the PLO, Fatah, and the Ba'ath Party. And you probably have heard of the Ba'ath Party because that's what Saddam Hussein was, but he's sort of a different version of it. So the PLO is the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is an organization that is designed to liberate the Palestinians through armed struggle. It is essentially the governing body of the Palestinians until 1993, at which point it is replaced with the Palestinian Authority. They're a legislative body, they're the government. And the largest group within the PLO is Fatah, and now they sort of mean roughly the same thing. But Fatah is based in the West Bank. They still have power there. It is ideologically secular. They are not Islamic extremists. Their belief is secular, political. They're not doing this out of religious reasons. They are doing this out of political reasons, and they are designed really, they're not, their first reaction is not always violence, but they're also not opposed to violence. They are sort of into the idea of using guerrilla force, and eventually both the PLO and Fatah are going to start using more and more violence, especially in the 1970s. And then the Ba'ath Party is a political party. It is a pan-Arab movement, this idea of uniting all the Arab people. They are opposed to imperialism and Western capitalism. They're really closely aligned with the Soviets, and they support the Palestinian cause. It's sort of and essentially all these groups and all of the Arab states with this pan-Arab movement are advocating for the destruction and the dismantling of the state of Israel. So this, by the mid-60s, has turned into an existential conflict. Does Israel have the right to exist as a state? And that's what both sides are really arguing over. And does Israel's right to exist as a state give it other rights as well? So on the eve of the Six-Day War, the Six-Day War is one of those interesting wars throughout history where there's no real cause for it. It's not like one side did this and the other side retaliated. It's that there was a decade of increasing and simmering tension between Israel and the other, and then the Arab states. So there was never a clear peace agreement to end the Suez Crisis between Israel and Egypt. So they're sort of in this pause, but there's still a lot of tension. There's still sort of threats, and both sides are escalating it. Both sides are using propaganda, using threats to make it more and more intense. Israel feels that they have a right to claim all of the territory included in the 1948 partition, both as designated as an Arab state and designated as Israel, and they feel that the Golan Heights in the north are theirs, so they'll often send forces into the Golan Heights to occupy, to eventually claim as part of the state. Israel also believes that it has the right to the West Bank, that it has the right to, and that the phrase is Eretz Israel, to all of Israel. There's also a resource war that is sort of very tense. There's this idea that, well, there's a plan by the Arab states to divert water from Israel, which would reduce the water resources of Israel by about 10 to 12%, which, when you think about where Israel is in the world, you know, to the east it has the Mediterranean Sea, but it's really, you know, quite a bit of it is quite arid, so they do need access to that water. Syria begins bombing and Israel frequently, or also shooting at Israeli tanks and tractors in the demilitarized zone. And then in 1967, Egypt places a blockade on the Straits of Tiran, which is the sort of main waterway where Israeli oil is coming to Israel. And they also say that they've mined the oil. That they've mined the straits, and so that if oil tankers come through, they will explode. So there's this real strong fear among the Israelis that they will lose access to oil, and 90% of their oil comes through the Straits of Tiran. All right, so the Six-Day War. After that increasing escalation that we talked about, Israel attacks Egypt in June of 1950. The June of 1967. The first thing they do, June 5th, 1967, the first thing they do is have an air attack that decimates the Egyptian Air Force, and then have a ground attack that swoops around the Air Force and conquers the Sinai Peninsula and then goes into Gaza. Then Israel conquers the West Bank by forcing the Jordanians to retreat, and then defeats Syria by doing roughly the same types of attacks that they had done against Egypt. It's basically, and as I talked about the Six-Day War previously, it's an escalation, or that there's ongoing escalation between the Arab states, and then with the consequence of this surprise attack by Israel. Israel only loses about less than 1,000, about 980 soldiers, whereas 20,000 Arab soldiers died. And now this is the new territory of Israel. They've conquered the Sinai Peninsula, which is this area. They've conquered all of the West Bank, all of Gaza, and the Golan Heights. And an additional 300,000 Palestinians become refugees and are forced to leave.
On the border between Israel and Egypt, a troop of Israeli frontier guards patrol a troubled area. The locale being that described in the sensational announcement by the Little Republic that its forces have penetrated deep into Egypt's Sinai Desert in the direction of the Suez Canal. An assault, it is said, that had to be made because of constant Egyptian military attacks on Israeli citizens and the mining of land and sea approaches to the Republic. It's a time of border trouble for Israel, and another incident on the Jordanian frontier results in a roundup of Arab infiltrators. Action that follows an attempt by these illegal entrants into the country to terrorize the Israeli populace living near this troubled line.